Now France, Holland and Belgium all competed in the fields of fine earthenware and fine china. But the greatest threat came from Austria and most particularly from Germany. Just a selection of German goods here. I'm very pleased to be able to point out that lovely teapot on the bottom left is in fact earthenware, not porcelain. Most of my references will be to continental China, but that was only a part of the trade. Other things were being sold at the time. Since the unification of Germany in 1871, German industries had modernised and expanded, challenging Britain's position as the preeminent manufacturing power. German goods of all kinds gained ground in the export markets across the world, and German ceramics began to compete in key British markets such as South America, India, Canada, Australia, and the other British colonies. Most troubling was the fact that by the early 20th century, Germany had replaced Britain as the main supplier of ceramics to what had been Britain's main market, the United States of America. As you can see from this graph, the difference between 1895 and 1908 is quite staggering. And I think the difference is equally obvious in this comparison of 1909 and 1910. Britain had fallen behind. There was pressure too in the home market, with continental manufacturers advertising their goods from 1880 and probably earlier. Just a few typical adverts from continental manufacturers, Liebe and Hoffman and Krister, and just have a look at these and see the range of goods that are being offered. Decorated china cups and saucers, mugs, candlesticks, vases, figures. Special attention given to orders with mottos and seaside places. Krister, moustache cups and saucers, useful and fancy cups and saucers, children's mugs, toast racks, lunch trays, candlesticks, high and flat. Jokes, egg cups, sick feeders, shaving mugs, tete sets, view china, presented china, they mean present from China. So a wide range of goods being offered there. Schulz, Sohn, 1899, very attractive floral decorations, a little over gold prices. White and gold prices. And then the Alexandra porcelain works, an Austrian company. Tea sets, dessert sets, trinket sets, grotesques, terracotta, pitch pans, pots and pedestals, many useful sundries, and so on and so on and so on. A little earlier, the Alexandra porcelain works were advertising the production of fancy china. Springer & Co, again a wide range of goods being offered. Point particularly to Jaeger Co and Krister, who appear to be selling their goods very much on their low price. Jaeger, famous for quality, style and cheapness, and Krister, useful and fancy china, faience, etc. Specialities made of good sixpence and 1 shilling lines. And then we also get the ads for the importers of foreign china. These are banned. I just dropped in a couple for your amusement. Joseph Roth, Frank Tuhten, William Oppenheim. These are among a few of many which are advertising at this time. So it's time to look at some pots, just to give you an idea of the sort of stuff which I'm sure very few of you collect, but actually are quite widespread at this time in this country. And they include the present from wares, and a selection here from seaside, present from seaside resorts, present from Southport, present from Scarborough, present from Tinmouth, and present from Bognor. And then we have present fronds from virtually anywhere you would choose to name. And they're often very difficult to read because of the hideous gilding. Present from Whalley, present from Sedbergh, present from Colchester, and the last one I think is a little more clear, present from Harrogate. And then we have items from Trinket Sets, as I've covered, dish here, moustache cups, generally recognisable by the bold inscriptions in Gothic lettering, forget me not, or remember me, or whatever, the sort of things you would have on a present to bring home from the seaside or wherever. Shaving mugs, egg cups, toast racks, sick feeders, little novelties. I've thrown in a couple of archaeological slides there because I couldn't find anything better. But Doll's House China. Now this does turn up. Doll's House China. Very important part of the trade. And of course, dolls' heads themselves. Oh, and of course, figures. Now, from here also we go, but do you know, if you look at a lot of late 19th century English-made figures, I think these stand up pretty well. Okay, they're not in the extreme. You wouldn't want in your home, but in terms of modelling and quality and decoration, I think they compare pretty well. Now, the success of German ceramics in the UK, in this country, led the American consul to note, when commenting on Scottish trade in pottery trade in 1905, and I'll read this: even in the home market, continental wares have an attractive interest for the masses. They catch the eye and please the taste to such an extent that English manufacturers of earthenware have to meet competition in their own markets. And it goes on to say, in what might be termed the staple articles, such as those which figure largely in the practical needs of the household, the Germans have successfully invaded the English market and built up an excellent trade for dinner sets, tea sets, dessert sets, cheap vases and trays, and a variety of small articles of the trinket order. A slightly earlier comment here from, I forget who, doesn't really matter, 1901. This hints at a degree of complacency on the part of British manufacturers. British manufacturers complacent? Sure not. We did not exactly regard it as competition when the French and Germans were sending their cheap trinket sets, present ware, into our home markets, because our manufacturers did not seriously undertake the production fees. Okay? And certainly many writers at the time were very dismissive of the cheap rubbish which was entering the country, and they made very unfavourable comparisons with British-made wares on the basis of quality and design. However, in doing so, they ignored the success of this rubbish and its wide appeal to the British consumer. And another little quote here. Continental ware has figured very conspicuously in all our large stores and retail shops generally. That's around 1900. Critics can at least be forgiven for not correctly judging the scale of imports. Official figures were not available until 1900, and imported pottery was recorded within the category of other articles. The first year for which figures were available, which recording imports of china and earthenware from other sources, valued these imports at £932,000. However, the scale of the foreign threat, slipping into the language of the time, did not go unnoticed in government here. And in 1887, the Merchandise Marks Act was introduced. And this aimed to prevent copying and fraudulent use of trademarks, and more generally to restrict foreign competition to British goods by requiring foreign manufacturers to mark any goods sold in this country with the country of origin. And another intention or hope was that this would encourage people to buy British goods. So, use of terms like this post-date the 1887 Merchandise Marks Act. The copying of British designs is referred to in many contemporary accounts and is used to illustrate the underhand practices employed by the competition to win British trade. There's a lot of xenophobia in the press at the time. But I'll point out that copying was not a practice confined to the Germans. In 1896, Ernest Edwin Williams attempted to alert the British public to the threat that Germany posed to this country's manufacturing and commercial position in his book, Made in Germany. The publication was prefaced by Lord Rosebery, this bit, who highlights the tremendous advances made by German industry and German commerce. And if you've got time just to glance through that, you'll see that Lord Rosebery actually had a degree of admiration for Germans and German industry and the success that they were achieving. Williams touches briefly on ceramics in his book, but he points to the decline in this country's export of the manufactures of clay goods, a decline from a value of almost 2.5 million in 1883 to less than 2.2 million in 1895, while imports had risen by almost 50% in the same period. And Germany was largely responsible for this increase. Germany's export of porcelain goods more than doubled between 1885, from £365,000 to £365,000 in 1885 to £737,000 in 1895. And Williams writes, the presence of German chinaware in this country is a matter of household knowledge. At present, the stuff is cheaply inexpensive, so the gross amounts on the books of the customs house do not get big in proportion to the nation's trade. Williams also considered that the cheaper German goods were superior to the British in finish, design, and so on. And he states that Germans were actually grateful to the Merchandise Marks Act, and they regarded it more as an advertisement than a brand. And other sources confirm Williams's assessment of the German threat. I can't show you figures for the goods imported into the UK during this period, but export figures give a clear indication of the British market, in this case to German manufacturers from with the UK actually being the second largest market for German ceramics after the United States in 1912. And in 1913 we can see that Britain was the main destination for Austrian ceramics at that time, ahead even of their exports to the US. So how did British manufacturers allow so much trade to fall into the hands of Germans and Austrians? I've already mentioned this idea of complacency on the part of some manufacturers. Others were well aware of the difficulties that they faced and intended to come out fighting, as this 1904 ad suggests. It's sort of a preface to the Great War, isn't it, really? Grimwades were intending to produce good quality wares, the same range of goods that were being produced by the Germans, but at comparable prices. Typical Grimwades language, this. And then in 1906, Herbert Colclough was advertising the best English china at foreign prices. And again, it shows that this firm intended to tackle the competition head-on by producing seaside and crescent ware, bazaar goods, goods in views, everything that the Germans were making, Colclough is advertising here. But these ads, rather positive in their intentions, hide a very difficult reality for British manufacturers. Commentators frequently point to an air of superiority amongst British manufacturers who believed that theirs were by far the best products on the market. In some cases they were probably correct, but the reality was that the German and Austrian manufacturers were able to produce wares of a quality which was at least comparable to British-made wares, but at a considerably lower price. Not only were German and Austrian wares cheaper, but they were more durable, more attractive, and lavishly decorated. In short, they satisfied the needs of the consumer, and this meant good business for retailers. One of the main reasons for the success of continental wares is given by retailers to J.G. Storey of New Brighton in a letter of 1911. Now, his firm had been looking for 30 years or more for an English pottery manufacturer to supply goods which would appeal to the seaside tripper, the so-called present-from wares. And although he would rather buy British, he was forced to buy German goods. Present-from, gold line, English factories asking 4 shillings and sixpence per dozen, plus carriage, plus straw and packing. The retailer had to take the risk of breakage, 5% advance. He gets an allowance of 2.5% in cash. But the whole price coming out at 4 shillings and 11.5 per dozen. Now the German manufacturer, by contrast, 3 shillings and sixpence per dozen. Teacup and saucer with present from, gold line, floral decoration, carriage paid, to domicile, cases, straw, packing, all free, and risk of breakage borne by the consignor. How can I buy English china? This is not an isolated comment. There are dozens of this sort. The other issues referred to here, the charges for crates and the charges for straw and packing and for carriage, these were above and beyond the cost of the goods themselves, and all were allowed for within the German pricing. And for overseas orders, the Germans included insurance, import duties, and so on. It's door to door, you knew exactly what you were paying, and there the Germans were hands down. And there are a whole range of other factors which underline Germany's success in this area. I mentioned the railway costs. This was a real sore point with retailers in this country. But also, often overlooked, were German marketing methods. The Germans, they were determined. As we see, Williams admired them. They ensured they had a knowledge of the country with which they were dealing. They had a knowledge of that country's specific requirements. And they went out of their way to meet these requirements. They conducted business in the customer's language. Payment was made in the currency of the customer's country, and speedy delivery was a priority. One example, an order placed with a German and English factory, or German and English factories at the same time. The German goods had been delivered, sold, and a new order was being solicited before the English goods were even delivered. That's the response of the British to their customers. Also, the attention to the needs of the customers. I think I mentioned that, but so often we hear in the accounts, British take it or leave it attitude. The British manufacturer makes what he wants to make. The foreigner makes what his customers want, and he produces it while the British maker is still considering it. And finally, packaging. We've heard of crates. The Germans were experts at packaging. They packed wares in the way that their customers required. They were convenient for unpacking, for breaking down orders. Everyone is full of praise for the way in which the Germans approached this subject, unlike the British manufacturers. Now, the British manufacturers claim that unfair practices, state subsidies, the dumping of goods, low wages paid to workers, and the long hours worked by workers, all put them at disadvantages. Yeah, and there's probably some truth in that, up to a point. However, at the end of the day, it all comes down to the fact that the Germans had an industrial plan. Their industries were supported by the state. They had proper technical and artistic training. They had proper analysis of markets and commercial possibilities within these markets. The Germans and the Austrians had modern and modernising industries which were eager to embrace new developments and practices. And it's no surprise, therefore, that the Germans were so successful, and that success extended into the most lucrative of markets for British manufacturers, the commemorative ware market. Now, the sale of commemorative wares is a major source of income for British manufacturers on occasions of royal weddings, coronations, jubilees, and so on. Hundreds of thousands of pieces were required for customers across the empire. And these events, as we know, they come around infrequently. But one such was the coronation of George V and Queen Mary in June 1911. One British firm alone is stated to have taken orders for 180,000 souvenir pieces. But not all coronation ware was of English manufacture. This was another area in which German factories specialised. You can see one of each here, the British mug on the left and the German plate on the right. One order for coronation ware caused such a storm of protest that a question was asked in the House of Commons. And this was an order given to a German manufacturer by the borough of Wallasey. Eventually, in the face of massive protest, the order was cancelled and given to Taylor and Kent of Monckton. But how many orders were not cancelled? I suggest that by 1914, the outlook for the British pottery industry and for the pottery trade generally was bleak. However, the outbreak of war in August of that year was probably the saving of both. The blockade of Germany's ports and the complete cessation of its overseas trade gave the British industry the opportunity to turn around its fortunes. There were challenges, of course. The import of raw materials was restricted, things such as flint and animal bone, or cut off completely, liquid gold and Jaeger combs from Germany. And workmen, of course, were moved into military service. Moreover, wartime conditions led to difficulties in this country supplying overseas market, trade dropping by around a third during the war years. Amongst the list of imported wares, there were a number of widely used items which British manufacturers had largely ceased making, effectively handing these lines over to continental producers. And these included many types of trinket set, invalid feeders, egg cups, doll's house china, doll's heads, and pierced ware. And a number of British manufacturers attempted to revive the production of these articles during war years. In 1915, for example, we can see Grimwades claiming that we have supply lines to replace the goods which our friends cannot now obtain from the continent, such as shaking mugs, sit feeders, trinket sets, cream jugs, egg cups, and so on. And then our H&SL plant, reminding their buyers that they're now making new lines to replace the German and Austrian goods, tea sets, pressware, viewware, salad bowls, fruit sets, dessert sets, fancy wares, patriotic ware, and children's tea sets, and so on. Examples. In 1916, Joseph Gray and Son were able to advertise a new litho and gilt cruet, recently produced to fill a gap created by the stoppage of cheap German goods. Nothing on the market can be obtained cheaper. It's clear that production at a competitive price was more of a problem in most areas than production itself. But of course, in August 1914, the competition disappeared. In 1915, the Perfo Pottery Company of Longton, oh yes, of course, you see, they introduced automatic appliances to enable them to begin the production of pierced ware, another area that the British manufacturers completely stopped making. German manufacturers also had a complete monopoly in the production of china dolls and dolls' heads. But as early as November 1914, several firms in establishing potteries had risen to the challenge, and a whole new business, dolls' heads, was established. Joseph Gray was one such concern. They started making dolls' heads after receiving a huge order from Harrods. And Gray employed 28 girls. Dolls were also dressed in the same area. The important quote here is, "The dolls will, of course, cost more than the shoddy German products, but are infinitely superior and made under the best conditions." Most of the manufacturers of dolls' heads were comparatively small concerns, employing very few people. Some lines took a little longer to introduce or reintroduce successfully, such as egg cups. It was not until March 1916, for example, that a retailer was able to write, "As to egg cups, I am very glad that one enterprising firm has tackled that line quite successfully, having brought out a capital shape in white, red and gold at a price nearly as cheap as the German article, and a great deal better." And the firm responsible for this was almost certainly the Kiel Street Pottery, which started business in 1915 for the mass production of utility wares. So in conclusion, import and export figures show that in the 2 decades before the war, the British pottery trade was in a dire state and getting steadily worse. British manufacturers were failing to compete with continental imports in both home and overseas markets, and appeared to have no solution. An ever-growing emphasis on cheap goods and seconds was causing disillusionment within the retail trade and was damaging the sale of best goods and actually compelling British retailers to turn to continental suppliers in order to carry on a viable business. The apparent indifference of the British consumer as to the source of the goods that they bought offered no reason for retailers to do otherwise. It's no exaggeration to suggest that at the outbreak of war, in 1914 saved the British pottery industry from extinction. And with this came an opportunity to change. But did things change? Did manufacturers learn from this experience and from all the soul searching that was done during the war years? Germany never regained its former position as a major competitor, but within a very few years of the end of the First War, there was a new threat to British trade, and that threat came from Japan. It was equally serious. But again, it was war which eliminated this competition and gave the British manufacturers another opportunity to get things right.